Greetings to all our viewers from across the nation and the globe. Welcome to the Treasures from the Vault podcast, and I'm your host, DJ Pereira. In this series, we'll be exploring some of the most exclusive artifacts from the special collections here at TCU's Mary Cowles Burnett Library. Joining me will be expert archivists and librarians who will give us an intimate exploration into these precious resources. So, why don't you come and join me? Let's have a look at what's inside the vault. Welcome to our viewers from across the globe. I'm your host, DJ Pereira, and on this episode of Treasures from the Vault, I'm joined by Senior Archivist Allison Kirshner from Special Collections. Allison, thank you for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
So I understand that you have an ostentatious item to present to us. Please tell us all.
Yes, so what we have here is we call it a log book. It's a guest book that belonged to Amon Carter that he kept out at his Shady Oak farm. As you can see, it's rather large. It's about 12 by 18 inches. It's made of leather, and it has gold gilding on the front and the back covers.
Now, Amon G. Carter, before we talk about the man, the myth, and the legend, can you describe the opulence behind this book? I mean, was this something that he got custom made?
You know, we don't have any record of how he obtained this book. He certainly had the means to have it custom made, or he may have just ordered it from a store that made these kinds of things. There's no indication on the inside or on the back that shows who made it or where it came from.
Well, Amon G. Carter, now, this was a man that definitely poured a lot of his capital and resources into making Fort Worth what it is today. How will this logbook tell us how he utilized his connections, his social circle, to make Fort Worth the hub?
Well, Amon Carter was one of the most well-known figures in Fort Worth in the first part of the 1900s, up until his death in 1955. He was the owner of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and he actually started the Star-Telegram by combining the Fort Worth Star and the Fort Worth Telegram. He was also Fort Worth's biggest booster. He wanted everyone to know about Fort Worth and how great Fort Worth was. He saw Fort Worth as, you know, the gateway to the West, and he really leaned hard into that Western lifestyle. He had a farm, Shady Oak Farm, in Northwest Fort Worth, where he had a house, and he also had built a saloon that was a Wild West saloon, and he would have big raucous parties there where he would put people up on a horse with 6-shooters and a cowboy hat on for pictures. And this book gives a record of who came to visit Amon Carter at the Shady Oak Farm.
So before you take us into his world, how pivotal was his role in between Fort Worth and Dallas and that territorial dynamic?
That is a good thing to point out, because one of Amon's biggest goals in life was to make sure everyone knew that Fort Worth was better than Dallas. At this time, Dallas was getting a lot of attention as a place for business, and Amon Carter felt like Fort Worth could be right up there with them, and he wanted to make sure everyone knew that.
Okay, well, let's see what he was all about and who he knew.
Yeah, let's take a look at some of the signatures in this book. The first one we're going to look at is right here at the top of this page. We have Bob Hope. And Bob Hope was a very famous entertainer in the first part of the 1900s, and he came to visit Amon Carter on a number of occasions. He would come to Shady Oak Farm. He would also meet up with him in Fort Worth. He was there. These signatures will generally say their name, where they were from, and the date they were here. So we have Bob Hope from Hollywood on September 15th, 1938. Another name here with him is Gene Autry, who was another well-known entertainer of the time, and Shirley Ross, who was an actress. And we don't have any indication about why Bob Hope was in town at this time. There's not any newspaper articles that talked about, Bob Hope is here for a show. He came through and made a stop to visit his friend, Amon Carter, at the Shady Oak Farm. Another great representation of Amon Carter's connections in Hollywood is Will Rogers. Will Rogers, a well-known entertainer, radio personality. He wrote columns in newspapers that appeared weekly across the world. And he, on this one, writes a note that says, Amon, Fort Worth broke the benefit record with its $18,350. That's thousands, not hundreds. But it took an Amon Carter to do it. Yours, Will Rogers. Will Rogers was in town for a fundraising benefit, and he was very impressed by how much Fort Worth was able to raise. And if you think about it, in the 1930s, $18,350 was a decent sum, and so he was really impressed with that.
Yeah, I just find it remarkable when you look at that figure today. It's peanuts, but that note, the way Will Rogers goes out of his way to emphasize, that's thousands, not hundreds. Do we know what benefit this fundraiser was aimed at?
Well, we don't have a date here, and so we probably could do some digging and deduce. We know Amon Carter, or that Will Rogers was here at this time, and there was a fundraiser done. But based on what we have right here, we don't know exactly which one it was. Something else that's really interesting is Amon Carter and Will Rogers developed a relationship, really intense in a very short amount of time. They met in the 30s. And were only friends for a few years before Will Rogers died in a plane crash in Alaska. And they spent a lot of time together. We have many records of them corresponding with each other, photos together, visiting each other. And when Will Rogers died, his wife asked Amon Carter to organize them bringing back Will Rogers' body from Alaska. And then he also helped to organize plans around the funeral in California. Amon commissioned memorials for Will Rogers that are here in Fort Worth. We have Will Rogers Memorial Coliseum with a statue of Will Rogers on a horse out front. That same statue is also located at Texas Tech in West Texas, where Amon Carter had helped to start the university. And the same statue is at Will Rogers' home in Oklahoma. And so he really had deep feelings for Will Rogers and was devastated at his death.
Allison, if you had not made me privy to all of that information, just by reading this note, it's easy to glean that there is just the tone evokes a camaraderie that extends well into a type of brotherhood. And the way he just signs it off, and again, it doesn't matter about the dollar amount or the date or the context, but yes, I'm now understanding how important these signatures and, more importantly, these personalized notes are into understanding Amon Carter.
Another area that Amon had a great amount of interest was aviation. We see he had relationships with all of the leaders in aviation. And tell me the name that you spot at the top of this page.
That's Charles Lindbergh.
Yes, so Charles Lindbergh was here on November 4th of 1928. And we know from newspaper articles that Charles Lindbergh was on his way flying from Mexico to St. Louis, where his home was, November 4th. He needed to get home to vote. And so he, on his way, made a stop here and visited with Amon Carter. If Amon saw anybody famous coming through town, he was going to snatch them up, take them to lunch, and take them out to the farm so that they could get an experience of real Western life. So we have that. We also have another aviation connection here. This first signature on this one is Amelia Earhart from New York, August 22nd, 1929. Now, Amelia Earhart, this date, these are the early days of aviation when there were these races that they would have to see who could get across the country the fastest, who could get across the ocean the fastest, different links, because you couldn't, at the time, get all the way on one tank of fuel. So you had to be really strategic about when were you going to stop, how long were you going to stop, all of those things. So this is the Women's Air Derby, which was the first official women's only air race in the United States. Will Rogers called it the Powder Puff Derby. And there were 19 women that started, 15 of them finished 9 days later. And we had the signatures of 10 of them here. So when they made a stop in this area to refuel, rest, Amon Carter took them out to Shady Oak Farm and fed them dinner.
Fascinating. Now, were all these female aviators, were they all American?
Well, you can see here, we actually have one from Australia.
There we go.
That was here. So they're from all over: Memphis, Tennessee, Long Beach, California, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Beverly Hills, Los Angeles, New York. So they came from all over, but they all had a passion for flying. And so we have a record of these women making a stop in Fort Worth.
Does his affinity for aviation give us insight into his establishing Bell helicopters?
Well, so one of his goals was to bring aviation, the fledgling aviation industry to Fort Worth. And so we have Bell Helicopter is headquartered here and still is today. Yes. He was able to get a contract during World War II for a bomber plant that was built here in Fort Worth. That was Convair, which became General Dynamics, which became Lockheed. Still here today. Okay. American Airlines has deep connections here in Fort Worth. Amon was in on the ground floor of the development of American Airlines. He would ride on the earliest passenger flights, the Clipper flights that would, for the first time, take passengers just for the purpose of transporting passengers, as opposed to, hopping on a flight that was taking airmail or cargo. These were passenger flights, and he was on some of those earliest flights.
So my question is, did he leverage his associations with these famous aviators and pilots merely to bring himself credibility when campaigning for these for these industries, or did he try to leverage these pilots and aviators to endorse him and what he was doing?
I don't know if we know that. What we do know is that he loved aviation. And so he made these connections. These are the early years, 1929. He was just fascinated with these first aviators like Charles Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart. But then I think he did see the writing on the wall about where the aviation industry would go and how air travel would become a huge industry. And so I think that he took any chance that he could to make those connections along the way. Before we look at another area he was involved in, I want to go back to entertainment and Hollywood. Yes. This next signature that we have says, "To Amon, a grand host and a great sport, no foolin', just Clara Bow, June 19th, 1930. And a lot of people may not know the name Clara Bow, but Clara Bow was a really famous silent movie actress at the time. And we don't know exactly why she was in Fort Worth, but we do know she had been in Dallas, and there's an article in the paper that says it was too hot. This is June. She said it was too hot. She had to get out of here. So she leaves, but before she leaves, she comes to Shady Oak Farm. And something that we notice reading through the signatures in this book is there are a number of other signatures on the same day, including Daisy DeVoe, who was an actress, but also Clara's assistant, and then a number of people from Dallas. So what we might deduce from that is that there was a group of people in Dallas that said, you got to get over here and see this. If you want to see a real Western experience or something like that, you know, or Amon Carter heard that she was in town and called who he knew and said, bring her over. But somehow there was a group from Dallas that brings Clara Bow over to Shady Oak Farm to get her real firsthand Western experience.
So what you're telling me is right here we're seeing Clara Bow's entourage.
Basically, at least while she was in Dallas.
Well, for our audience, I wish you could see what I'm seeing, but that penmanship, I have to say, is exquisite. And not just hers, but just gleaning through these pages that you're showing me, it does speak of a time and an era. Yeah, it's just so romanticized here. Yes,
and you can see how people would create their signature to represent themselves. You know, there are a number of signatures you see repeatedly throughout this book that look the same every single time. And, you know, we say that's their signature move, right, or that's their signature. Yes. This is, you get that, it was recognizable. Her signature would have been recognizable. Clearly. And it kind of looks, it's real flowy, and yes, it looks like what you would expect from a starlet, you know? Yes. Some of these, we've got JCPenney here, the department store, but also that was a real man, and he came multiple times. He had relationship with Amon Carter. His maybe looks more like you would expect from a businessman, you know? Mm-hmm. Some are messy and completely illegible, yeah, and some are just like the most perfect, neat handwriting. So it's kind of a lesson in reading cursive, in reading different styles Definitely. Of handwriting, which is not something that we experience a lot anymore.
Definitely, yeah. These days, yeah, handwriting, especially in the education industry, you see a lot of print, mm-hmm, but here, every single page that you've shown me, the handwriting is completely and unabashedly in cursive.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's what was expected. So let's look at another area that Amon Carter was very involved and very enthusiastic, and that would be sports. Okay. Amon loved sports, and on this page we have Jack Dempsey, Los Angeles, California, August 31st, 1930. Now, Jack Dempsey was a well-known boxer at the time, and he had been in town the year before for the World Heavyweight Championship, which Amon Carter helped to bring to Fort Worth. And he would visit multiple times over several decades. They maintained a relationship. And then underneath Jack Dempsey, you see Joe Wade, who is the vice president of the Memphis Baseball Club. Now, that's not a name that you know, but in Fort Worth at the time, Fort Worth had a baseball team called the Panthers, or the Fort Worth Cats, as they were kind of commonly known. And So whenever there would be a baseball team that would come in, Amon Carter would make sure to entertain as best he could to make sure that these teams would want to come and play the Fort Worth team. And so just on this page, you know, this is the baseball club takes up almost this entire page. So you get this sense of, you know, we have Jack Dempsey and then we've got the baseball team all here within a month of each other. And so he was always trying to make those connections in the sports world as well. Another area where he loved sports was TCU football. Amon Carter was a Fort Worth man through and through, and TCU was the Fort Worth team. And so, you know, we here at TCU really love this. He was a great supporter of TCU in general. He donated money for the salaries of professors, for scholarships. He also helped to raise the money for the football stadium here on campus that was completed in 1930. And what we have on this page are the signatures of the 1930 TCU football team. So the first team to get to play in the stadium. Now, in the 50s, they would rename this stadium Amon Carter Stadium as we know it today. But at the time, it was just the football stadium. But he had been the biggest booster for it and raising money. You see some really neat signatures here. The TCU band director wrote a little musical, couple of measures of music. You see, they all make these little notes. TCU's best friend, Amon Carter, a great domino player, apparently. Hospitality Plus, a perfect host. They had a great time, and over the years, including the later years with the national championship team in the late 30s and Davey O'Brien, who won the Heisman, he would have these different teams out to the farm for dinner and a party. Another thing that Amon was very famous for worldwide was giving away Shady Oak Stetson hats. He had a specific hat that he would have made, and he would have them made. Everyone on this football team got a Shady Oak Stetson, but also presidents like Franklin Roosevelt or world leaders like Winston Churchill got Shady Oak Stetson hats. Amon would send these as a way of making connections with people. When people in this book would come to Shady Oak Farm, especially the really famous ones, he would make them trade hats. So there was a shelf that he had that had all kinds of famous people's hats. And they went home with a Shady Oak Stetson. So I love the idea, though, that he was also giving them away to the TCU football team. And so that's just one of the other connections that he made along the way and really endeared people to him.
Clearly, regardless of the age, whether it's Prime Minister Winston Churchill or this entire roster, he understood how to commemorate auspicious moments. And yeah, I mean, he clearly, Amon Carter understands the value of goodwill tokens from what you're telling me.
He did. Now, along the lines of large parties out at Shady Oak Farm, these pages represent another large party held at Shady Oak Farm. Now, you're not going to recognize any of the names on this page, but according to the top, they are the men of General Motors, April 12th, 1935. And they were invited out to Shady Oak Farm because Carter was trying to get a General Motors plant here in Fort Worth, and he was successful, and it's still here today. You can see there's some really great comments on these, some that we can read on the podcast and some that we can't. But we've got one that says, "Amen, let's pull a real celebration when all GM units move to Fort Worth." Somebody else said, "I'm glad I don't live in Dallas," which I'm sure Amon really appreciated.
I see one with a Cadillac reference.
Yes, we've got the Cadillac. We've also got one over here that says, Mr. Carter, we're glad that you don't ride in a Buick, which he may or may not have ridden in a Buick. But so this gives you a good picture of the way that Amon would use his ability to build relationships to benefit the city of Fort Worth. There were so many, I mean, all the things that we've mentioned industry-wise that have come to Fort Worth and stayed in Fort Worth because of the relationships that Amon Carter built in the 1930s.
You know, I don't mean to sound trivial, but earlier I did mention how everything was in cursive, but here at the top of the page, it's in print, but even so, the letters are highly stylized, which again speaks to a quality of penmanship, which is rare to see.
Yes, sometimes before these parties, they would have somebody come and write a special title across the top that was really interesting. We also see this guy wrote in shorthand. And so unless you can read shorthand, I can't. It's hard to tell what he said, but looks like H.G. Howard from Chevrolet. So yeah, it is, you come across all kinds of handwriting in this book.
Now, we do start seeing some dates here along the way. Can this logbook be used to identify the impact he was making throughout his life as far as being a trailblazer, entrepreneur, an influencer? Is there a way to discern from these signatures and the types of parties he was hosting?
Sure, you can see, I mean, we have these here, but what you can do is you can take the dates and the names and you can cross-reference them with newspaper articles from the time. Amon Carter always had a Fort Worth Star-Telegram photographer with him, even on Christmas morning at his house. So he would make record, and as much as he could get into the Star-Telegram, he would. But also, within the Amon Carter collection here at TCU, you can make connections to correspondence related to these parties. One of the reasons that I know that all of the TCU football players got hats is because there's correspondence related to that specific party where they list out everybody's hat size. And so you make the connections within the collection between, okay, we know this person was here on this date. What else in the collection relates to this person on this date or other dates? You know, what was their relationship? And one of the most important relationships that we know Amon Carter had was with President Franklin Roosevelt. So we have a single page with no other signatures. So what does this tell you? He's important, right? Franklin D. Roosevelt was here on June 13th, 1936. Roosevelt had a son named Elliot who married a local girl, Ruth Googans, and they lived here in Fort Worth. And so Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt would visit often. And a lot of times when they were in town, Amon Carter would find a way to meet up with Franklin Roosevelt. This particular time is June 13th, 1936. This is 1 month before the Fort Worth Frontier Centennial. Now, a little side story about this. 1936 was the 100th anniversary of the state of Texas, and there was a bitter battle between the different cities of Fort Worth over who was going to get to have the official celebration. Dallas won. And you can imagine, he did not like that. Amon Carter did not like that. And so he said, y'all have your party, we're going to have our own. And he really advertised it as the Dallas celebration is the serious one. Come to Fort Worth to have fun. And it was rowdy. It was Wild West. There were burlesque shows. There were, things you wouldn't take your mom to. and Amon really wanted Franklin Roosevelt to open this celebration up. We don't know why, but Franklin Roosevelt declined. But what he did agree to do was open the Fort Worth Frontier Centennial over the phone by pushing a button on his yacht. So he got his, he participated in that way. But what he did also do was, we have the month after the Frontier Centennial starts, we have John Nance Garner, who was the vice president at the time. Franklin Roosevelt's vice president comes, and that becomes the big draw. We have the vice president at the Frontier Centennial. Amon Carter had campaigned for John Nance Garner to get the nomination for president instead of Franklin Roosevelt. When he didn't get it and became Roosevelt's vice president, Amon Carter still supported him, and they remained close for the rest of Garner's life. But what is really interesting here is that you see on the same night that John Nance Garner and his wife, I believe, were at the Shady Oak Farm, we have a bunch of the entertainers from the show come out with Garner to Shady Oak Farm. And these are not as well known today, but they would have been very well known at the time. Paul Whiteman was a well-known music leader, and he was in charge of all the music for the Frontier Centennial. Sally Rand was a famous burlesque dancer, as was Ann Pennington underneath her. Sally Rand is another one of those signatures that kind of seems to fit the personality you would expect.
Just exquisite.
Yes, and so we see the kind of combination now of the politics and the entertainment and the Hollywood together at Shady Oak Farm. And this gives us the picture of Amon Carter as a man who makes relationships, and he makes things happen through the relationships that he has.
Yeah, it's important to state that it's typical that you can find people leveraging other people because of their job titles, but he was leveraging people because he was benevolent and he knew the worth of human relationships. Mm-hmm. For all that can be said about Amon Carter and all the wealth that he owned, his best currency was his interpersonal skills.
I believe that that's absolutely accurate. He would use those to bring industry here, to bring events here, like the Frontier Centennial, those kinds of things. But he also, if he got word that somebody was trying to, that a company was going to go to Dallas or something major was going to happen in Dallas, he was going to try and use his relationships to get around that and get ahead of it and say, really, you want to come to Fort Worth. Remember what a great time we had there? It was kind of like an old boys club where he would have these parties and wine and dine, and also, give them hats and all kinds of other things to remind people we're here. And it really is effective in making Fort Worth what it is today.
So, Allison, how can this document be of use to a collegiate student body or a collegiate faculty? In what ways could they utilize this to understand local history?
Yeah, a couple of things that I think about. This book, if you research who was here, why, and when, you see, number one, what was going on in Fort Worth in the specifically the 20s and 30s for this book, because it goes from like the late 20s to the maybe early 1940s. There were, the farm was around longer than that, but that's what's covered here. But you can also see the relationships that were made. You see this person and this person were here on the same day. They knew each other. Maybe they met at Shady Oak Farm, and so you see the way that these interpersonal relationships kind of created a web that went beyond Fort Worth.
There's so much history in this book. But as you were sifting through the pages, I couldn't help but notice the water stains and this hard dropping tear that almost extends to half the page. How fragile is this book, and what are the ways that Special Collections goes about preserving this immeasurable, invaluable document?
Well, you're right. This was a book that got handled a lot.
Okay.
I imagine Amon Carter coming and being like, check out this page, you know, look at who was here last month, or people just flipping through it and seeing who had been there. And so you can understand how tears happen in that situation, how you know, somebody leans over and their cocktail sloshes onto a page, unfortunately the Franklin Roosevelt page. But so we try really hard from this point of time to preserve the materials as they are. And so one of the things that we do to limit how much this book is handled is we have the whole book scanned and photocopied. So if a researcher comes in, we will help them see a page, we will handle it and we'll open it, but if they want to go through the whole thing, they're able to see the scanned images or the photocopied images. And that way we can store this away and not get the tears or the oils from the hands that happen with a lot of handling.
And how does your team go about preserving these signatures?
Yeah, so what we do is we keep this book with pages interleaved of acid-free paper in between each page that prevents the acid from spreading from one page to another. We also keep it in a box in our vault that is climate controlled.
Okay.
Also, it keeps it out of the light. The light would cause the ink to fade, and so we keep it stored out of the light in cooler temperatures with like a steady humidity, lower humidity, just to make sure that it doesn't further deteriorate.
And what does one have to do to come and visit Special Collections and gain rare access to this?
Well, we'll provide the website address that one can go to submit a form where they can make an appointment to come in and visit. We are happy to pull this out and assist someone in viewing it. They can also request access to view the digital files from wherever they are. And so they don't have to necessarily come in person, but we do always welcome visitors.
Well, Alison, I have to say, you know, we live in a time where, especially in the digital age, where a lot of tools and means are used nefariously to get one's way, to circumvent or subvert the system. But it is refreshing to know that at least once upon a time, that human relationships and human connections was recognized as the ultimate tool to, even though get your way, there's a level of sincerity and humanness. And this book epitomizes that quality of Amon Carter.
Yes, he was a great and influential man, and we in Fort Worth and at TCU are grateful for the efforts that he made to promote the city and our school.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I strongly recommend that you do make an appointment and come and visit Special Collections and definitely learn more about the influencer that was Amon G. Carter, and certainly come and acquaint yourself with this logbook and see the number of influences that he associated himself with. Alison, truly thank you for sharing your passion and your expertise on the Shady Oak logbook.
Yes, thank you for coming.